I'm a world building geek. I love it. It's like my
Yes.
jam. I love world
Oh,
building.
thank
I
goodness.
will forgive a bit, well, not really. I'll forgive poor characterization in a book if the world building is a character in
Yes.
itself, and I'm like, yep, that's fine. Okay,
Yeah.
I love this world, so I'll forgive it.
Hmm.
So I wanted to build a world, and I started. I love maps at the beginning of books. I study them. I look at all the
Hmm.
places. When
Yeah.
I'm reading, I go back to the map, and I'm like,
Yeah.
where are they on the map?
I don't even like
Um,
maps in real life. I just like I just
no,
like
it's fantasy
putting them.
maps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi guys, and welcome back to Tales from the Green Dragon. My name is Matt, also known as Miggins on Twitter, and this is my channel Hobbit Hole Books. Now, Tales from the Green Dragon is a series where I get to talk to some of the best authors in fantasy right now, and it is an absolute delight to welcome today author and indie community treasure, Mark Timmony. Now, Mark is a native from Down Under, and as a kid, he mostly kept his head down under between the pages of a book. Mark's life
That's true.
changed when he got a job at Sydney's oldest genre specialist bookshop, setting him on the path to be the author that he is today. Now, I was first introduced to Mark through the wonderful and engaging Felix Ortiz cover. I don't know if you can see this right here. And ever since, it has been at the top of Mount TBR with an enticing prologue that I have read to grab the mood reader in me. Inspired by the likes of Robert Jordan, Janny Wurts, Weiss, Hickman, and more, Mark's world of Athme is one fantasy fans will delight in, forging a path anew whilst maintaining the hallmarks of the genre. Now, Mark still works in the bookstores today, continuing to inspire him as he continues to work on book 2 in his series. Mark, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing all right now. I've got
Yeah.
to kind of grips with things, and we've set everything up. Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
too
Thank you
bad.
for that lovely introduction.
No worries. Yeah, I always like to kind of write out a thing for each author and kind of personalize it a little bit. And I had to look around your website, and so I'll put the link below to Mark's
Oh,
website. If you haven't checked it out, it's actually a really, really good author website compared to some that I've seen. It's very, very professional, and there's a lot. There's a map, a glossary. It's great. So yeah.
awesome.
Um. So I guess we kind of start off with kind of when you were growing up, how did you kind of get into fantasy? Where did it start for a
Where
little
did it
in
start?
Australia?
Sure. So, I wasn't a big reader until I changed schools in what in Australia is year five. So I left my primary school, went to year five, which year five and six are the last years of primary,
Yeah,
and moved into high school. So we had this school that started in year five for the move. And to be honest with you, I think it might have been the first week I was there, I went into the library because I'd always loved books. Although up until that stage, most of the books I'd picked up were picture books or small Roald Dahl books, stuff like that.
yeah.
And I walked into the library at this new big school, and one of the new release books was Dragons of Autumn Twilight by Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman. And I was like, a dragon's on the front cover. What is this? So I picked it up and took it home and started reading that night and have never looked back. That was my first introduction to fantasy, Dragonlance. It was like all the stories that I had made up in my head or would like to watch on television had come to life in a book. Knights, wizards, dragons, ancient gods, dark powers, prophecies, all of that good stuff. And yeah, it grew from there. Then I had discovered David Eddings and Terry Brooks and Frank Herbert, also Raymond Feist. And then in the early 90s, it was probably, I think, The Eye of the World, from what I can recall, came out around March 1990, 1991, or something like that. And I discovered it in the local library in October, and that just blew me away. And yeah, Robert Jordan became my favorite ever author. One of. I mean, I also had read the Empire trilogy by Feist at that stage, and discovered Janny Wurts.
Yeah.
Um, and I'd read Melanie Rawn and the Sunrunner trilogy. Um, a lot of Door books, Door authors, Jennifer Robson, CJ Cherry, lots of people like that. And yeah, those, but Robert Jordan, Wheel of Time kind of crystallized for me the type of story that I really like, that traditional epic fantasy story, and the type of story that I wanted to write some stage in the future. That was the big dream. Yeah, that's kind of where I started. Forgotten Realms, Dragonlance, the early, well, mid to late 80s, big name fantasy authors. Um, and then, Robert Jordan, and then obviously later Stephen Erickson, um, people like that, Mark Lawrence, a lot of Australian authors, Karen Miller, Jennifer Fallon, Trudy Canavan, Terry Shillito, and luckily working at the bookshop, I got to meet them as well. Um,
Oh.
I would beta read for a number of them for different projects that they'd done. I'd get my hands on manuscripts early, like even before they were produced into a ARC edition. I remember one year HarperCollins sent me the basically a printed out manuscript of Janny's most recent Wars of Light and Shadow that she'd handed in.
No way.
And yeah, it was amazing. It was
Oh,
so good. It was like Christmas, and I got
yeah.
to read it. It was unbound. I got to read it, and she knew I was reading it because I was an active member on her forums. Well, I was back then, um, and so I was able to give feedback to her as well, which was cool. So yeah, I got to do things like that, which also helped me in terms of learning about structure, and as we were talking a bit earlier, like what worked for me and what didn't, and why it didn't or why it did. Learning the art of giving a critical analysis without criticizing um, work, and understanding my own likes and dislikes, as well as identifying what the author is actually trying to do, and if it was hitting the right beats or not, that sort of stuff. So yeah, that's where I started.
Well, it's interesting because, like, when you're saying about how you started and sort of dragons on the cover, it kind of reminds me of when I was younger. And one of the first books I read was Eragon. And I remember when I was a kid, and the second one, Eldest, that's the one. And that thing was flipping enormous as a kid. And I
Yeah,
think that's probably where my love of chunky books started, was
yeah,
Eragon Eldest. And I remember back then when I was younger, I think I was very ambitious trying to read these books. It must have taken me 2 tries to read Eragon. It must have taken me, I only got about halfway through Eldest. I did have a copy of Brazinger, but I never read it.
mm,
And then I started with Eye of the World as well when I was about 13. I just wanted to
yeah,
find the biggest fantasy series I could. And I was like, oh,
yeah,
this one's the longest. Surely the longest, the biggest means the best. Uh,
yeah. Yeah, that's interesting because yeah, when I started like Dragonlance and even Forgotten Realms, there'd be like small paperbacks about 300
yeah.
pages, and I remember those being big for me and taking a couple of days to read through it, and I go, wow, this is such a big
Days.
book, right? And
That
like a
would take
week or
me like a
something,
week still, but
yeah, a week, and then you'd get the Terry Brooks Sword of Shannara. That was a chunker.
yeah.
That was a big book. And then Elfstones, that was even bigger. It was like, wow, what are these massive books? And
Yeah.
then, you get Eye of the World, and it's like, these are bricks. I love them. Give me more of
Which is
these.
funny because now they're like the small ones. Now I've got, Cahill's of War and Ruin. That's 1400 hardcover. That thing's a deadly weapon. I
Yeah,
don't want to
yeah,
take it out. The police might arrest me with carrying
yeah. It's a
it out.
doorstop.
It's crazy.
Get enough of them, you could build a house.
Yeah. I was genuinely shocked by quite how big it was, and quite how heavy it was when I got it the other day.
Yeah, I can
Um,
imagine.
yeah,
I have the ebook. I don't have it in a physical
yeah,
copy,
I
so
got
yeah.
both. Oh, I love it. And you know what? It's interesting. I think people's like, I was really into the series, and
Mm.
then I had a really good time with the first one, and then the second one I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was wonderful. But then I think the hype has also hyped me up. And so now when
Right.
the third one came out, I was like gone from being sort of fairly hyped to like through the stratosphere, like how I used to be for Sanderson hyped. I think
Yeah.
it's very interesting
There
how it works in the community that this collective
there is
hype
something to
kind
be
of
said
builds.
for hype. Yeah.
There is, yeah. Which is interesting because I was going to say about the Wheel of Time Robert Jordan books. Now that you've been spending time with them since they've been out, has your kind of like perspective changed over time? And there's a lot more kind of
On
like,
the books.
yeah, now that there's a lot more kind of nuance and critique in kind of the fantasy community, has that kind of influenced your perspective? Has things changed as you've grown older and you've read
Um
widely, or
yeah, I guess I don't know if I mean I suppose other things have influenced me over time as well. I mean, I still very much love those books.
yeah,
They still are rated by me personally as my favorite books. But I also know they're not perfect, and I recognize Jordan's, well, I say flaws, but places where he kind of dragged his heels, or I don't know if he was having trouble working out the story or the pacing or what he needed to be said or how he needed to do it. But like, I can honestly say that I enjoyed all the books up to books and including book 6 and even book 7. I think 8, 9, maybe 10, I was a bit like, what is going on? And because I would read them as they were released as well. So
of
that's
course,
my
yeah,
journey was, yeah. And then he got for me got finally got back on track on the last book he wrote before he passed, which was Knife of Dreams.
yeah,
I'm pretty sure.
yeah,
And yeah, and then Sanderson finished the rest, and while I didn't love those, he did an admirable job, and I'm glad somebody finished them. So we got to see the end of the story, and he brought his own flavor and his own style and understanding of story structure to it, which helped get Jordan's stuff to the end in 3 books, where it may have taken Jordan longer than the 3
yeah.
if he'd
Well, if it
managed
took
to do them.
Sanderson 3, then goodness knows
Yeah,
how many it would take Jordan.
yeah. Um, I mean, for me as well, it those books worked as well as they did because I had however many years of the voice of Jordan's characters in my head already. Those characters were alive for me. So when I picked up Sanderson's work, even though it was slightly different and he didn't, for me, didn't land every character quite right, the
Yeah, yeah,
voices of the characters were
yeah,
still loud in my head that are kind of like I worked past it. Um, so yeah, I think when I read those, 8, 9, and 10, I was kind of disappointed, a bit frustrated. I was getting them as they were released, and you didn't know when the next book would be coming, and you didn't know where he was going or what he was going to give you. And then there was a book, Heart of Winter, that Rand, my favorite character, wasn't even in, and stuff like that became very frustrating because I didn't care about Perrin's journey at the time or what he was going through.
yeah,
Looking back at it now, and I've reread them all a number of times, including on audio, the Michael Kramer and Kate Redding
yeah,
audio books, which I love. Um, it's become a lot different, and I guess, mellowed towards those books because I understand the importance of the story he's telling to the greater story
yeah.
of the series. So yeah, my opinion of those books has mellowed over the years, I guess.
And now being an
I
author, has it kind of sorry? But I was just gonna ask, being an author, has it kind of changed your perspective on that kind of frustration of having to wait
Mhm.
for Jordan to write those books? Do you now sort of understand?
Yeah, well, yeah, given how long it's taking me to get book 2 done, yes. Um, sure. I mean, it is a juggle. The first book, Blood of the Spear, for me, the characters, and this isn't a big spoiler, but the characters are basically travel together as a group through the entire book. So you can change POV chapters, but everyone's still kind of together and the whole group is experiencing the same thing. So you can look through a different person's eyes. And you don't need to spend as much page time with each person because everybody's still included as they go along.
Yeah.
Um, in book 2, they're not all together at the beginning, and I need to dedicate story time to their individual stories, which are separate from the group. So that gives them more page space and means more words being written
Yeah.
while they do different things, and also working their individual stories in such a way that there are ebbs and flows. And, one storyline is rising while another is falling, and
Mhm.
that kind of give the reader the momentum of like, oh, okay, this one's starting to slow down now, but this other one's taking off, and
Yeah.
keep the interest. So that's and as a consequence, I'm getting in my head about how many words am I actually going to write, and that's great that Ryan can do 400,000 for his
Well,
third
yeah.
book. I don't want this one to be 400,000.
No.
I think it might hit the 220 maybe.
You're
And
good.
even then, and I'm fine with a big book. That doesn't worry me. But yeah, it's it's kind of weird. It's like I've only written one book, so and a novella, so this is still early days, and this book structurally is a lot different to the first book. So
Mm.
um, it's a bit of a learning curve still.
So when you write, do you write in kind of like a Sanderson way where you kind of do all the POVs that if they're separated, you do one POV in one go and write that beginning to end, or do you kind of intersperse them?
I had tried to intersperse them, and I kept finding that I would get to the end of the chapter and I was just kind of like into it. I was getting my momentum happening, and then I'd have to stop and change to something different.
Mhm.
And it was like the story for me, the momentum kept stalling. So I have now changed and I am focusing on one POV at the moment, and I'm going to write that story first. And then I'll pick another POV. So, but that means I've also got to basically draw up a calendar for my world, so I know where each
Yeah.
one of them are. So
Oh,
chronologically, over time, we're moving forward still, and I'm not. Yeah. So I know where every story or every
yeah,
chapter
I've
is
seen
based.
even.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's going to be fun. I mean,
Yeah.
we're always moving forward, so it's just a matter of me working out. Okay, well, how many days have passed in this chapter?
Yeah. At least you know
And
time travel.
yeah, right. So I mean, there's flashbacks to past events and things like that as well,
Well,
but
at least it's linear, but
it's
yeah.
within. Yeah. So yeah, so this book is I'm going to be writing like that, and it's a little bit like in a way it's a bit like how I wrote Starbinder, the novella, because that focuses on one particular character. There are a couple of other voices in there who have their own chapters, but we're still following Rihanna's story in that. And so I'm kind of taking the lessons I learned from that to put into the crafting of single POV arcs in book 2.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of tell us a little bit more about how it kind of first started. What was the first kind of nugget of the idea that came along for this world?
Well, I'm a world building geek. I love it. It's like my
Yes.
jam. I love world
Oh,
building.
thank
I
goodness.
will forgive a bit, well, not really. I'll forgive poor characterization in a book if the world building is a character in
Yes.
itself and I'm like, yep, that's fine. Okay.
Yeah.
I love this world, so I'll forgive it.
Mhm.
So I wanted to build a world, and I started, you know, I'd love maps at the beginning of books. I
Mhm.
study them. I look at all the
Mhm.
places. When
Yeah,
I'm reading, I go back to the map and I'm like,
yeah.
where are they on the map?
I don't even like
Um,
maps in real life. I just like I just
no,
like
it's fantasy
drawing them.
maps.
Yeah.
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 Um, and I love all of that. And I love, you know, oh, they've reached this place over here. And
Yeah.
I know, wasn't Diana Wynne Jones wrote the Guide to Fantasyland or something, where she kind of pokes fun at all the tropes and traditions
Okay.
of popular fantasy, and the map is just like, this is places that we're going to visit through every story is in the map. Um, so I started building the map and were thinking, you know, I want to create this world. I want to have history. I want depth. I want, you know, it to be a living, breathing place as best I can create it. And I'll think of the story later. So I just kept doing that. I was building the world, creating cultures and realms and their history and the timeline. And then I'm a big fan of the fantasy art that used to come out of, but still does to a degree, what was TSR became Wizards of the Coast.
Oh,
And
okay.
so
The
the publishers of Dungeons and Dragons and
yeah,
D
has
and
well
D and
over by
yeah,
House yeah.
yeah. And I used to follow Larry Elmore and Jeff Easley and these big
Yeah.
name fantasy artists that they had. And I was flipping through. I discovered that Larry has a website, and I was going through his gallery of fantasy art, and I came across a picture of a shaman, what looks to be a shaman, with a great big staff with a ram's head on it, kind of crossing swords with a knight. And I
Mm.
was taken by this image, and I was like, oh, who are these guys? What's their story? And then I
Yeah.
started to make a story in my head, and that became, oh, this is my story. This is the story to set in my world and give the impetus to drive on the stage that I've been creating. Um, so that story I created in my head as to who these two people were
Oh, brilliant.
became the basis of the Blood of the Spear, book one of the Eye of Eternity.
Yeah, I remember hearing this story about this art. I think I might have seen it because I heard
Mm.
you on Blaze. I'm from Under the Radar SFF,
Hmm.
and I that was a great podcast. And I remember that listening to that story that you just told, and you know, it's fascinating. And I've seen the painting, and it is really
Yeah,
striking. It's quite dynamic.
yeah.
And then so
So,
how did it kind of grow from that into what
well,
today?
I well, it was basically, I felt that they had a history, these two men, and I started to fill in my own background as to what that history was, what their relationship was, where they both were in their lives in my head, and how they got there. And that was like, oh, okay, cool. So I can start my story at the beginning of their history,
Mm,
and that particular image is not necessarily the end of the story, but it's certainly a later event in their lives. And I've even not written it, but I made notes about the event that's going to be told in the story.
okay.
So I don't want to give too much away, but basically they became in my head two half brothers,
Mhm.
Kyle and Darian Torrance. And it was like, well, how did they end up? They were their brothers or half brothers. How did they end up seemingly at odds um, at this stage? Because Kyle is a warrior, a knight, and Darian becomes a magic user, the Seralis, one of the version of magic user or mages in this world. And yeah, that was the beginning. I had the beginning of my story, and then I could start working out the rest of it. Like, I had the stage set,
Yeah.
like, ready to go that I could throw them into, and it was a matter of finding the right story to put on that stage. and that's the type of thing I like.
Yeah. So, how much the world is kind of on show, or how much do you plan to show? Is there a lot that you kind of plans that that's just for you, just so that you can kind of build
There's a
as well?
lot that's just for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've, contrary to popular belief with fantasy maps, we're not going to visit every city on the map in this story. Sorry, but like I've got, I know the history of a lot of those places. Like I haven't written a lot of it down, but I'll be like, oh yeah, Highgate, I know what happens there and what that looks
Yeah.
like, and I've got lots of different stories in my head and in my notes for the different realms. So we don't have kingdoms, they're realms, although there are kings and queens. So the idea of nationhood is, to what realm do you come from? And there's a big weight of history. And a lot of people have said, oh, there's so much history, it's like really dense. It's like, well, it is, but I also
I
feel
like
that,
it.
yeah, sure. Me too. I love that sort of stuff. Like Steven Erikson, it's his first 50 pages. It's like his learning curve is basically a cliff face. You have to scale.
Yeah.
It's like, it's vertical. You go straight up. Um, and I love that type of thing. I love getting into a world and reading the book and not quite grasping all the different things that are being thrown at me and understanding where they all fit. Um, but we start on the Borderlands, the Borderland wilds, and because that's where these companions have grown up, they aren't experienced with the rest of the continent, and the rest of the kingdoms and the capital cities and the like around the place. So as they travel from the wilds through the world and learn more about it, so does the reader. Um, and I felt that for me just felt natural. It made sense. Um, it has been described as a travel log, but it's
Hey, I like
half
it.
of the course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so there's stuff happens, there's action, there's ancient demons and past
Yeah.
wars and prophecies and hidden powers returning and all that sort of good stuff. And these two brothers have to find their way in the world and have to grow into the men they're going to become in my story,
Mhm.
because they have a big role to play.
And so how much of it have you sort of got planned out in your head, and how much you kind of put in there to foreshadow, or are you kind of just taking it, by the seat of your pants?
Half and half. I've got the end point worked out. I have the end of the second last book worked out. I've got the end of the book I'm working on worked out. And I've got the parts that I need to get to across the books in between. The details around those things, I don't know 100%. I kind of discover it a bit as I go along.
Yeah.
I have discovered in the past that if I map everything out for every single chapter, by the time I'm finished, can't be bothered writing it. I find that discovering it as I go brings a lot of spontaneity. And I've also discovered that my subconscious loves to work things out and give me and put things down that all of a sudden are like, oh my God, this means that, then this, and this connects to here, and this goes over there. And well, I didn't even know it was coming. And all of a sudden I've got this thread that was like, cool. I got into the end of book one and I'd done, I don't know how many drafts, and realized that a lot of what I'd done with it was very reminiscent of of the Eye of the World, and I was like, we need to change this. It needs to be, make it more of your own. So I took out two characters from the beginning of the book and moved them to the middle of the book, which made things a lot different. But as I was going along with that, I then changed another thing later in the book that and I can't talk about it in detail because it's a
Yeah.
spoiler, but the change that I made without any particular forethought instantly fit and connected a whole heap of other dots that expanded and deepened the story again that I hadn't planned on beforehand. So there's this bit of spontaneity I like in not planning everything out because my subconscious is kind of working on it when I'm not.
Yeah. So was there kind of a point when you were writing it where you kind of go from this is kind of just fun, I'm just creating my own world, to okay, I think maybe this could be, you know, publishable by the end. I'm gonna work towards this.
That was always the goal. That
Okay.
was always the goal was I want to write something that I can publish. I want to write something that I can get out in the world and have other people hopefully feel about it the way books like The Eye of the World or Curse of the Mistwraith made me feel. That the worlds that inspired me and excited me and made me want to spend more time there, or to be places that I'd actually want to go and visit to see what they're like and experience. And I play a lot of World of Warcraft as well. And some of the vistas, particularly in the newer expansions with the better graphics, are places that are like, oh, this is so cool. I want to I'm almost living there through
Yeah.
my digital character. But I love that type of stuff.
So the World of Warcraft, the digital world inspires you a lot, but I guess being in
Yeah.
Australia, it's quite a weird place for someone like me. There's a lot of creepy crawlies and things. Do you find
Yes, there are.
inspiration when you travel Australia or?
I mean, sometimes the rugged coastlines and the I mean, this is all I've known, right? I haven't lived overseas. I haven't lived through
Yeah.
Europe or European winters or their evergreen forests and stuff like
Good
that.
for you.
We don't have that type of stuff.
Yeah.
I'd love it. I love the cold. I hate summer, and we're always hot here.
I
So
mean,
it's like
compared
I
to
don't.
Australia, yeah. I've got to
Yeah,
prepare for it. I've got to go from England to Australia, but yeah.
yeah. So I mean, I feel most of the landscaping I've done in the world is Sobia, the continent that's it's on is Athme, is very European-esque, I guess. And I know there's some criticism by fantasy readers of like, oh, boring, give us something different, give us more diversity. I'm like, but that for me, that's what I like to read. That's what I'm used to. I'll enjoy reading it, and I kind of set my story there. I've got nothing against other types of cultures or landscapes or environments, and I'll probably explore them moving forward in my writing career. But for this particular moment in time and starting this story, that's where I'm based.
So do you have other stories in mind, other worlds, or is it all kind of
Hmm.
more in this world?
No, or there could be more in that world, in this world, but I have a lit RPG idea,
Okay.
more progression fantasy. So like no, not so much of a focus on stat numbers and all that sort of stuff, but
Yeah.
leveling and getting and that type of thing. And I have I call it a space fantasy, so Star Wars esque slash Dune slash Warhammer 40k type universe that I've been working on as well. So different places, different
Yeah.
locales, different things. Yeah,
Awesome. And I was going to ask about kind of growing up,
yeah.
through kind of going from a time where it kind of wasn't cool to be a fantasy fan to now, I guess we're in a bit of the golden age, where Brandon Sanderson can do his Kickstarters, where we've got the D&D movie that I'm seeing
Mhm.
tonight. I'm very
Oh
excited.
wow, I'm so
I'm so
jealous.
excited. It looks so good.
Yeah.
I know people are a bit
Oh,
skeptical.
and apparently, Joe, I can't pronounce his last name. I'm going to
Oh, I
call
can.
him Mangolia,
Yeah.
but yeah, he's doing a live action TV series of Dragonlance with Wizards of the Coast.
Oh wow.
So I'm like,
Yeah.
bring it.
What's it like kind of going from people being like, fantasy, what's that? To kind of like, fantasy, yeah, this is kind of top of the TV kind of.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I've always found friends who like fantasy, right? So I've always been around people who enjoyed it and I could talk to about it or share books with, or and then working in the bookshop, we all obviously loved it as well. That was what we were at. We was a genre specialist bookstore. That was what we sold. There are different types of story. Like I was the big epic fantasy person, and then somebody else was urban fantasy, and we had horror and science fiction as well. And so I always had friends and people who shared my interests around me. So now it's kind of like, yeah, you're all talking about this stuff. I was reading Game of Thrones when it was first released. Come and talk to me
Yeah,
about it. What a genius Martin is. I know. So it's kind of like, yeah, whatever. This is great. Um, but I think I've always kind of found my fantasy people, um,
mhm,
and obviously with Twitter and stuff like that, and getting
yeah,
involved in the indie fantasy community has just expanded that for me, because I tend these days to be more involved in indie than I am in traditional publishing. I don't
me too.
really find stuff that traditional publishing is doing that I'm interested in. I find more of it
Yeah.
in the indie pub. So thank God it's really easily available to everybody now.
Yeah, because I know there's been a bit of a debate in the community the last few days about kind of should there be a kind of mark of quality in the indie community.
Yeah, that becomes gatekeeping. And
Mm,
look, for every good or quality product you come across in the indie community, you will come across one that is not as refined. I think you'll get that anywhere, especially where anyone can put together a book and then upload it and get it out there. I don't know that gatekeeping's worthwhile, but I guess you could kind of find that with the reviewers, that and what they say about stuff.
yeah,
I mean, quite often, don't judge a book by its cover, but with the indie fantasy, you
dude,
kind of should,
we do.
because yeah,
Yeah,
if they haven't spent the money on a really good cover, then it's likely that the editing may not have been of a really high quality either. Maybe it's all they could afford, and that's fine. Totally get that. It's not a cheap proposition to get a good fantasy cover or get extensive editorial work done on your book. It's
yeah.
You're paying professionals, freelancers, but they're professionals, and it does cost. But for me, it was worth every penny. Um, and
Absolutely.
I couldn't imagine not doing it in future. And
Yeah,
I do come across some books, and I'm just like, I've got some friends who I've worked with, and I've seen the route they've chosen to take, and I'm just makes me shake my head. It makes me sad, but that's each to their own. We all have our own paths, and I think it's a matter for the reader to decide whether or not they like what they're getting or they don't. So
yeah. They'll decide with their
they
wallet
can
on Amazon.
download a sample first before they purchase it, so try it out, see what other people are saying about it.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think it's still such a shame that there's still almost a stigma about the indie community because it is so wonderful, it's so diverse, and it's not like
yeah,
I'm trying necessarily to be like avoiding Chad or more part of the community. It's just this is where my interests take me. And I think I guess it's similar to the difference between a mainstream film and a sort of a more indie art
hmm,
house film where you do
yeah,
get more kind of specific kind of you get more kind of really specific hyper specific kind of books in the indie community, and you see kind of people taking more risks that you wouldn't necessarily see in a trad book. And I kind of think,
yeah,
goodness, what would happen, for example, if Ryan and Ryan Cahill had taken Of War and Ruin, sent it to his publisher, it would have been chopped in half.
mm,
But you know what they would have cut out? They wouldn't cut out all the action parts. They'd cut out all the little moments where there's little moments of comedy and moments that make you feel something, that give you a bit of heart, that it's not necessarily a distressing moment or an intense moment, but it's just a moment that makes you really understand these characters, real people. And you think the editor might just go, okay, right, we've had 5 of these, you know, we don't need another sort of bonding moment, funny bonding. And you sort of think, like, but that would take out what's so special about it. And so I'm so glad that we've got this community.
And those decisions, particularly with traditional publishing, come down to economics. Because the more words on a page is the more pages needed to produce the book. That costs money. How much are they going to have to charge for people? How many do they have to sell to make back what they paid? All that sort of stuff. And that's one of the reasons why indie books can be so expensive, particularly the physical copy versions. Like, unfortunately, my physical copies are not cheap. I've tried to keep them as close to traditional prices as possible, but it's just, it's not possible for me to actually not end up owing the printer money for each book. So it's really difficult. You have to hope that the readers love it enough, or that, you know, engage, that they are prepared to spend the money on a physical copy of the book for their bookshelf, or because they prefer to read it.
A beautiful physical copy of the book. So thanks for sending that along.
You're welcome.
It's very, very beautiful. I wish I could take it with me to or when I come over your neck of the woods, but
you get it signed in person.
Well, yeah, you might have to sign my Kindle. Like, you know what? I got my Kindle. I went to FancyCon last year. I attended in the evening, and I had this whole kind of dramatic journey to get there, involving a puncher. Thank goodness for my friend who picked me up at 1 a.m.
Oh wow!
Drive, yeah, because I got there. I got 3/4 of the way there, and then I had this puncture, and everybody was kind of like at the FancyCon was kind of already drinking at that point, so nobody just come pick me up. Thinking, how am I going to get there? I hadn't told my dad how far it was, because he would absolutely blow his gasket if he called him up and said, I've got a puncture and I'm 12 miles away. He would, he would be very happy. So I didn't want to tell him, but I couldn't go back because I'd have to walk that long. But also, after a while, the tire, even if you walk it, it just makes it worse. And eventually you get to a point you can't even walk your bike home. Luckily, I was able to manage to get it to the center, and then we could get in my friend's car. So I was able to go. But I didn't have a copy of Voice of War. I had the audio copy that I got from Zach, but I didn't have a physical. All I had was my Kindle. And so I had my Kindle case that I had. And very kindly gifted to me by Paul English Wolf. What a guy. And I got Zach to sign my Kindle case.
You should take the Kindle case everywhere you go and get all the signatures from all your favorite authors that you've got on the Kindle. Is it a white cover, or do you need a white pen to write on the black cover?
Well, you need a black marker, and it hasn't come off. Thank goodness. Oh, and Zach is a wonderful guy. I mean, I sort of interacted with him a bit on Twitter before. Soon as I walk in the room, he goes, Miggins, and gives me, comes in for a big hug. Bear in mind, we've only interacted like once or twice on Twitter. And it was really only previously from the last few days talking about FancyCon. I hadn't read books. It's just, such a warm welcome. Zach's a great guy. And he does an amazing karaoke, which I'm sure I
saw some pictures, some videos,
There is some video somewhere that I may use to blackmail.
Get you the arc of the next book,
Yeah. Well, I need to listen to the others first, but so I have to get you to sign my Kindle case. You second person. When I come stop over after, in between going from somewhere in Southeast Asia to New Zealand, I'll stop over and come see you in NC Kusis. We'll have to hang out.
Yeah, totally. That would be great.
It's still a couple of years away, but yeah.
It's okay. Hopefully, touch wood, I'll still be around.
Yeah, hopefully. And hopefully I'll be able to read your second book by then. So how
Yes.
far along is that at the moment?
Not as far as I'd like, but the goal is to have it finished before the end of this year for publication in the first quarter of next.
That's very
That's the goal. It's that whole Douglas Adams quote about loving the sound that deadlines make as they go rushing by. So, but yes, I plan to stick to that.
Well, if we get it out in the first quarter of 2024, I
Yeah.
probably will have time to read the physical edition and purchase a copy before I leave, because I'm on a sort of a time limit now. I've got till
Okay.
November next year. I'm leaving, and so I've
Mhm.
suddenly gone. Oh no! I've got all these physical books. I've got to get through these arcs that you've all sent me. Then I've got to get through all the books that I've got.
You'll have to stop accepting new ones.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna get through all these books, and it's a real shame because at the minute I stopped reading Wheel of Time. I started book 6. I haven't got back into it yet, and that's been about a year. I just just been so many other books to read. I've also got obviously Janny Wurts, Wars of Light and Shadow. I'm,
Yes.
I've I'm reading The Gallant, and I'm nearly halfway through Ships of Merior,
Hmm.
which is fantastic. And I've also got the next two, at least two. I think I've got the next three in that series, but only in physical edition. And so there's all these books that I'm thinking, if I don't finish them by the time I leave, I'm not going to read it. So Wheel of Time, there's no way. I've got most of the remaining books, but I don't have them on Kindle. They're like $9.99 a book on
Yeah.
Kindle.
Yeah.
It's like, why would I do that? I can get it for £1 on used
Mm.
books, but now I won't get to finish it because
Yeah.
I've only got till November. Which, I mean, I'm not complaining. It's an exciting thing I'm going to do, but I'm on this time limit now. Suddenly, oh no, I've got
Yeah.
a year and a half to get through all these books. But yours will certainly be one of them, because I mean, I even started it before I got through the first couple chapters, and I always say it's a very engaging start. It
Cool.
does
Thank
feel
you.
very classic fantasy, but definitely original. And I was intrigued by this world. It really fits into that vibe that Ryan Cahill, John Gwynn, a
Hmm.
lot of others are doing in fantasy right now. And I guess kind of you came even sort of just before that, really. You was kind of on the cusp of this kind of resurgence of classic fantasy in this modern style.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that
Oh,
seems to really be popular.
well, yeah. I mean, that, like I said, that's what I want to read. That's what I look
Yeah.
for. I look for that classic epic fantasy. And obviously, I don't want to bring all the tropes and the um, cultural norms that I grew up reading. My
Oh,
own
understand.
styles or understandings of things have changed a great deal through my life. So that's one of the things I want to reflect in my books. One of my a very good mate of mine, Mark T. Barnes, is an Aussie author who writes is a absolutely brilliant writer. One of the things he's happens to be a vegetarian, and whenever you read his books and he talks about food and he talks about the most elaborate feasts you can imagine, there's no mention of meat anywhere, and it's because the people in his world, they're very close to animals and they don't kill meat, or they don't kill animals and they don't eat meat, and it's never knocked over your head. It's never like
Mm.
this is a stat, this is bad, you shouldn't do this. It's just when you talk about food, meat's just never mentioned. It's just not one of the things that's on the table. It's just not there,
Yeah.
and that's the only thing. It's not a political statement. It's not whack you over the head with it. It's not no stance he's taking. It's just the way it is. And I'm like, that's the type of thing I want to bring into the cultures in my book. So there's no sexism. Male or female can inherit. If a female's born first, she can be the heir. There are female warriors. There are inter same-sex couples. There's none of that. It's just not it's not a concern, right? There's no racism and stuff. The discrimination that comes about is more about nationhood, and I suppose like the French versus the English type thing. The rivalries between
Yeah.
and like, oh, don't trust, or even Australians and Kiwis.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. Or if you want to go so close as to look at states in a country. Like there's the in Australia, obviously we play rugby league, and there's the great competition once every year of the state of origin, which is Queensland players and New South Wales players. They form a team. They had 3 matches, and it's big rivalry between Queensland and New South Wales, and that type of that
Yeah.
type of tension will come out as opposed to racism or sexism. Um, yeah.
Which I think that's, something that I don't think I've actually read a world where there isn't that. I think a lot of the characterization of the villains in these worlds often comes from this discrimination, or there's like a sort of an arc in the book where it's about learning to kind of overcome that discrimination, or somebody fights against it. I think, there's certainly a place for that, and I think it's can be really empowering. But I think, it sounds quite wonderful to be able to explore a world where there isn't anything like that, and that you don't have
Yeah.
to resort to that for your villains, that there's other kind of motives for why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah, totally. Because that, to be honest with you, that type of motivation in a character, I don't connect with.
Mhm.
I mean, so the majority of the races that we come across in my books are human. There are the Ave, which are a Fey type people, and there's an insectoid people, and a bird-like people as well. But you don't get a lot of don't get a lot of mention, even a lizard people, in the first book anyway.
I love lizard people.
Um, yeah, the lists
I've only
are a
read
thing.
one
Yeah.
lizard person, and I absolutely
Okay.
loved it.
All right. So I got lizard. The lists are a thing in my world, um, and there are the Amarians who are basically human, but they have blue skin, and they are very xenophobic, maybe. But if you so there is slavery in this world. That is a
Okay.
thing. And if you set foot outside of the capital, the two main cities in Amaria, where did I say Aldania before? I meant Amaria, the Amarians. Um, Outside of those cities, and you don't have blue skin, you're basically free game for being taken as a slave. They're very like,
Wow.
you can only visit these cities, and if you step outside, then it's like, yeah, no. So, but they're a very, very large nation and a bit insular as well, even though they're in the middle of everything. So there's that type of stuff in the book. I think it's a much more interesting exploration of people, of villains who are seeking power, and like, well, what happened to them in their childhood that made them like this, and sometimes nothing happened that made them like that. Maybe they were just born that way. But there are dark forces in this world also. So people who swear themselves to the void, and the demons that come from it. So those types of challenges and empowerment of villainry are the things that I like to explore more than racism based or sexism or homophobic.
So is there like a favorite part of your book that you're kind of like, this is something I'm really proud of, or is this something I love to write about, a particular kind of theme or area, or something like that? Or
Oh, well, I love magic in books. So exploring the magic system, because in the first book, you don't really get into the nitty gritty of it all. So it can seem like a soft magic system. It's not. It's a hard magic system. There are hard and fast rules behind it, but you're not going to experience or explore that until book two,
Mhm.
because the characters didn't explore it or know enough about it. And there was no real page time for that exploration. So originally the book was 204,000 words. And when I worked with my editor, it eventually got cut to 173,000 words. So we took a lot of info dumping out, and it was more you got to explore through experience rather than have it history and relevance get info dumped at you. So any of the areas where there was some info dumping about these things was removed, but they're going to have to be explored in book 2. And that's going to be explored across 2 different schools of magic. So they're kind of like, oh, don't repeat yourself, Mark, don't repeat yourself. It's 2 different characters exploring 2 different types of magic schools. So they have to have their own other different stuff around them. The systems are obviously different, but that they're exploring, but they have to have their other stories different as well. So yeah, so there are some threads that run parallel that I'm a little concerned about, you know, doubling up on. But I have to work out my that info dumping and make sure that it's in a sequential order, so it all makes sense in terms of the revelation of how this goes with that. And it's like, oh wow, okay, I get all these differences and why they are actually different.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine. There's so much to juggle as an author. You know, you're kind of like putting all these puzzle pieces together. You're the
What
director.
do you put down and what don't you put
Yeah,
down? And yeah,
yeah, and then you know, on top of that, you got to market your books, you got to promote your books, and then
oh
you find
yeah,
time. You've got a day job. You read
yes,
well, probably far more than I do, even.
yeah,
Um, and I just don't know how you kind of manage it all.
yeah,
Yeah.
with great difficulty at the moment. um, but you know, I need the reading time. I can't. I'm not the sort of writer who can just sit for hours at a time writing. That
Yeah.
doesn't work for me. Not first draft. First draft, I work best in what I call sprints. So 30-minute sprints, and I can generally get an A4 page written in that time,
Mhm.
and sometimes more. Um, and I've trained myself that I can stop after 30 minutes, go away for an hour, 2 hours, half a day, and come back for another 30 minutes to the next page and be able to pick it up like that where I was at. Um, so that works for me, and I put up my quota of how many sprints I want to do in a day, and that's builds momentum. And if I do that every day, then the words start flowing and it becomes easier each time. Um, I'm still looking for that perfect schedule for myself at the moment, because I'm in a different role, a different job, a different company than I was when I wrote the first book. And when I was at the bookshop in the city, that involved a lot of travel time on public transport, namely the Manly ferry from Manly to Sydney, to the city, Sydney. So across the harbour every morning, and that's a half-hour trip, and that would be a dedicated half hour twice a day.
Yeah.
And then I would build other spaces throughout the day as well. I now drive to work, so that's an hour either way for driving, for where I work now, and I can't obviously write while I'm driving, and I haven't yet tried dictation, maybe, but I'm still very much, I like to see the words forming on the page.
Yeah.
So I haven't got it there yet, but once, yeah. So that's the big um, aim at the moment, is getting those dedicated sprint sessions down, and then just go for it. Because otherwise it just moves at a glacial pace, which is what's happening at the moment.
Well, I suppose as readers we'd rather wait a little longer and get something that really fits your vision and really kind of fits the quality of the rest of the series that's already been published.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Well, Janny Wurts liked it. You got a cover
She
quote.
did.
Like,
That was
how
great.
did you
Yeah.
kind of like approach Janny about that? Or
Well, I've known her online as a
Yeah.
reader and interacted with her for a number of years now, through mainly through her website and the forums on her website. And you know, as a big fan, I wrote letters to her when I was reading her work, and she would
Wow.
respond, and we'd have some interaction. And then obviously when got myself on Twitter and she was on Twitter, and we'd chat and retweet and stuff like that on Twitter. And she knew I was writing, and she always said, if there's anything I could do to help, let me know. And
Gosh.
so I was like, would you mind reading it? And if you like it, giving me a cover blurb. So she said she would, and she was nice enough to do it while she was in the final throes of writing the last book of Walls of Light and Shadow.
Finished now.
And yeah,
Yeah.
so like I can't believe it. I can't wait to read it. I'm so excited.
Wow.
Um, so I mailed it to her, and she read it very quickly, and then she put aside some time in her schedule of getting, like, at the end pages, the ultimate climax of her magnum opus that she'd been working on for like 15 years or more than 15 years.
Yeah.
And sat down and wrote some words for me, which
Wow.
was amazing. She's an absolutely great lady. She's a wonderful writer and a really, really nice human being. Yeah.